As fighting rages, civilians in Gaza struggle to survive.
We came here yesterday and came here today to get what is left over from our homes. Of course, it's total destruction.
The U.S. and its Middle East partners try to make diplomatic progress across the region. And the U.S. strikes Iran-backed groups in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, as those groups warn of escalation.
Perhaps, if things continue to develop like this with action and reaction by the parties involved, it may lead to an unpredictable regional war.
This is PBS News Weekly. I'm Nick Schifrin. In surprise Thursday evening remarks at the White House, President Biden gave his sharpest critique yet of Israel's response in Gaza.
The conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top.
This as Secretary of State Antony Blinken took his fifth diplomatic mission to the Middle East this week, an effort to make progress on a deal to pause the war in Gaza and release Israeli hostages. Fierce fighting between Israeli and Hamas forces continues in Gaza, with civilians caught in the middle. In the heart of Gaza City, in neighborhoods they thought they'd cleared, Israeli soldiers fight courtyard to courtyard and floor by floor. They've been assaulting the city for months, but Hamas militants still fight back. The fiercest combat is in the south, in Khan Yunis, a city of 500,000 that is increasingly filled with smoke and destruction. Israel's defense forces said soldiers raided a booby-trap training facility for Hamas's October 7th terrorist attacks. Israel says it's now destroyed 18 of Hamas's 24 battalions, on its way to what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Israel's unchangeable military goal.
Total victory is essential because it ensures the security of Israel. Total victory is the only way in which we can ensure additional historic peace agreements which await.
Until the guns stop, back in Khan Yunis, Palestinians such as Hassam Ahmed Abu Haytham return home despite the risk of being shot. He salvages what he can.
We came here yesterday and came here today to get what is left over from our homes. Of course, it's total destruction, as you can see.
Local hospitals are mostly destroyed, so Palestinian Red Crescent workers operate out of tents, doing what they can to treat injuries. Ibrahim Abu Olkas is a paramedic.
The free people of the world need to come up with an instant solution to end the struggle of the Palestinian population as a collective, and especially the medical teams that are daily subjected to murder or injury.
And Gazans don't have enough humanitarian aid. Rafah now hosts more than 1 million people, nearly half the Gaza Strip. At this charity kitchen, the lines are long and supply is limited.
We asked the President of the United States to help the people of Gaza. Instead of helping Israel with rockets and bombardments, he should look at how much the people are struggling to get a plate of food or a loaf of bread.
Blinken stopped first in Saudi Arabia and then in Qatar and Egypt, the countries mediating the talks, before landing in Israel to push for an increase in aid to Gaza as part of the broader deal. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this week rejected a counter-proposal from Hamas that would have paused the war in exchange for releasing Israeli hostages. He reiterated what you just heard was his long-standing goal: absolute victory.
The continuation of the military pressure is a necessary condition for the release of the hostages. Surrendering to Hamas's delusional demands that we heard now not only won't lead to freeing the captives, it will just invite another massacre. It will invite a major disaster on the state of Israel that none of our citizens would want to accept.
The original proposal called for a 6-week pause to release older women and children, and then a promise of 2 more releases that would end with soldiers and the bodies of hostages held by Hamas. Hamas's counter-proposal went further, demanding an Israeli withdrawal, first from populated areas and then from Gaza completely. It also demanded reconstruction, more than 500 humanitarian aid trucks per day, and the understanding that Hamas would remain in power. Blinken said the talks over the hostages would continue.
While there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached.
So where do the negotiations go from here? I spoke with Marwan Muwashir, Jordan's former foreign minister and deputy prime minister, and Dennis Ross, a longtime Middle East peace negotiator for both Republican and Democratic administrations. Dennis Ross, let me start with you. What is your reaction to what Prime Minister Netanyahu said in response to Hamas's counterproposal?
I think he really had two audiences in mind. One audience was Yahya Sinwar, who is the head of the military wing in Gaza and actually is the person in control in Gaza. And the other audience was probably the right wing of his own coalition, where he knows they're threatening to break the government if he looks like he's prepared to end the war or give in too much to Hamas. So I think for Sinwar, what he wanted to signal was, look, you're asking to end the war and you stay in power? No way, not accepting that. This was Netanyahu's way of beginning a readiness to signal that he's going to negotiate, but he's going to negotiate hard. And I would say the Hamas proposal, counterproposal, is itself a kind of first counterproposal designed to produce a negotiation. I don't think there was any Hamas expectation that the Israelis would accept something like this.
Marwan Washer, is this a signal that Netanyahu is going to negotiate, even if it is negotiate hard?
Well, look, if Netanyahu says that the war will not end until he kills the Hamas leaders, then from the point of view of Hamas, why should they agree to release of hostages and then agree to a truce of whatever, 2 months, 3 months, and then after that they get bombed again? So if this is the real position of Mr. Netanyahu, then I'm afraid that, this is a non-starter. Secretary Blinken talked about the Palestinian position being a non-starter. I see the Israeli one being a non-starter if this is the real position. I think the priority today has to be the end, a permanent end to the war. After 27,000 people killed, one cannot keep talking about truces that are not permanent.
Dennis Ross, is this Netanyahu's actual position, or is this a public stance? And does this doom any effort to end the war in Gaza, even if temporarily?
Look, I do think it's a negotiating posture, but I also think that we really have at this point, two irreconcilable positions. The Hamas position, as Marwan just suggested, is they want an end to the war and they want to remain in power. And the Israeli position is, at the end of the day, Hamas is not going to be in power. I do think what the actual position should be, at least on the Israeli side, should be the demilitarization of Gaza and the certainty that it can't be remilitarized. I also think you can tie reconstruction to demilitarization, something the Israelis are in the process of doing. No one is going to be able to eliminate Hamas, partly because it's an idea, partly because it's a group, partly because in some ways it's embedded, at least sociologically, psychologically, in Gaza. But Hamas not being in power, Hamas being demilitarized, Gaza being demilitarized, those are objectives I think that could be achieved. I think if the focus turns to that, then the gaps between the two sides, which seem so irreconcilable, might be bridgeable.
Marwan Washer, is there a version of Gaza in the future that has Hamas not in power?
I don't think Gaza is the end game, Nick. The end game has to be the end of the occupation. If we talk about the package where the end game is the end of the occupation and the establishment of a Palestinian state, a lot of these questions that are difficult to answer today become easier to answer. Are we serious about finally ending the occupation and establishing a two-state solution as the United States says it is? In the end, Hamas has to become a political force. We have seen this with the IRA in Ireland. We have seen this in many countries across the world. We have seen organizations that were called terrorists, but that became political forces in the end. Look, today the Palestinian polls are clear. 60% of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza want Hamas to stay in Gaza and rule over Gaza after the war. These are numbers that cannot be ignored. The question is, how do we give these people a political horizon so that they do not believe in armed resistance, but that they do believe that finally a process can lead to the end of the occupation?
Dennis Ross, let's use that occasion to zoom out. So what the U.S. theory of the case right now is that a temporary pause could lead to larger discussions about exactly what Marwan Washer just said, Gaza reconstruction, the future governance of Gaza, and then normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, leading to a two-state solution. Is that the correct approach that the Biden administration is taking?
I think it is a logical one, and I think it could be the right one. Obviously, it's not just that the devils are in the details. The Israeli public was traumatized by October 7th. They fear, when you talk about a Palestinian state, that Hamas will come to dominate that state, and Hamas, by definition, doesn't accept a two-state outcome. And this is not just a recent phenomenon. This was the case throughout the 1990s. Every time we were making progress, we got a Hamas bomb. There is an ideology in Hamas that rejects Israel's existence. The question is, do you have a Palestinian national movement that in the end will be dominated by those, and who will demonstrate they're dominated and control the movement, that is prepared to live with Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people? If that becomes very clear, then you can get a Palestinian state. You're not going to have peace until you have an end of occupation. But there's got to be responsibility and accountability on both sides. On the Israeli side, they're going to have to demonstrate they're prepared to live with an independent Palestinian state. But the Palestinians are also going to have to demonstrate that they reject those who reject the idea of two states.
Marwan Muasher, is there Palestinian leadership that the U.S. and the region is working on today that could foresee that future that Dennis Ross just imagined happening?
Of course. One of them is in prison, Marwan Barghouti, who is ready for a compromise.
Marwan Barghouti, whom Israel tried and convicted of terrorism charges 20 years ago, but maintains his political viability and is one of the most popular Palestinian leaders today.
Absolutely. I mean, Dennis talks about ideologies. What about the ideology of members of the Israeli cabinet today that are openly calling for the expulsion of Palestinians? Ideologies exist on both sides. We need to change the mindset of both Israelis and Palestinians who today do not believe there is a partner on the other side. And the only way we can change the mindset is if we offer a serious process, not an open-ended process, but a serious process that ends the occupation.
Marwan Muasher, Dennis Ross, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.
Blinken also met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman during his visit. Saudi leaders have made clear they are still interested in normalizing relations with Israel in exchange for U.S. security guarantees. But they say that won't be possible without, quote, irrevocable steps toward a Palestinian state. To discuss that, I spoke with Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and Khalid El-Gindi, head of the Middle East Institute's program on Palestine and Israeli-Palestinian affairs. Khalid El-Gindi, let us zoom all the way out. The pot at the end of this rainbow, as I said, is Saudi-Israel normalization, what the Saudis are now calling irrevocable steps toward a two-state solution. Is that possible with the Biden administration as mediator and this Israeli government?
I think it's certainly possible that the parties, the Saudis, the Israelis, the Americans, could strike a formula that works for the three of them. I'm not sure that it will be meaningful in the end, but it might be enough to persuade all sides to, attach their names to it. I think the problem isn't with getting people to accept a state. Even Donald Trump had a plan for a Palestinian state at the end of the day, as devoid of meaning and sovereignty as it was. I think what would be far more useful is if the United States in particular were talking about laying out a clear plan for ending Israel's occupation, both in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and Jerusalem. If the plan were focused on ending Israel's occupation, then it would be much more meaningful. But as it stands, sure, statehood, a Palestinian state, two-state solution, these are throwaway lines that have been agreed to and ignored in the past.
Aaron David Miller, should the U.S. be more focused on Israeli occupation than talking about two states?
Well, any meaningful commitment to Palestinian statehood by an Israeli government that was serious about negotiating a deal and a Palestinian partner that was serious as well is going to must bring about the end of Israel's occupation. I do agree with Khalid that I think such a deal is possible. I'm concerned about it. I think we risk overpaying the Saudis in bilateral coin, mutual defense treaty. I don't think we've concluded one with any country since the 1960 U.S.-Japan treaty was revised, giving the Saudis access to American nuclear technology without allowing them to control the fuel cycle. That's a huge blow to our proliferation policy. And I also worry that in the end, whatever commitments Israeli government makes is not going to lead to irrevocably to a serious negotiation. Palestinians have to produce a partner. Israelis need to be serious as well. Then we can start talking. I don't think Israeli-Saudi normalization is the key to ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
That outside to in strategy has been continued by the Biden administration. It was started by the Trump administration. But pick up, Khalid Al-Gindi, on that point that Aaron David Miller made about a Palestinian partner. Is there a Palestinian partner, and is there a quote-unquote revitalized, to use Tony Blinken's word, revitalized Palestinian Authority? Is that possible?
What's more important than a revitalized Palestinian Authority is to have a revitalized Palestinian leadership. Whether it's a Palestinian Authority is irrelevant. What Palestinians need is a national leadership, and that speaks for all Palestinians, both inside and outside the occupied territories. That we don't have. Mahmoud Abbas is not that leader. He has been parochial, he's been ineffective, he's been weak. I think it is possible to imagine a different Palestinian internal political configuration, but it's something that Palestinians have to do on their own. But I would add to that leadership equation the United States. The United States has not been an effective broker. It has not managed this crisis well. It has actually taken, I think, very reckless decisions from the get-go, giving Israel a green light with no red lines of any sort. And we are now 4 months into this horror in Gaza, and they sort of painted themselves into a corner. So we also need a credible American leadership that understands and has empathy for and the ability to connect with people on both sides. Right now, the Biden administration has only managed to show humanity and empathy for the Israeli side.
Aaron David Miller, is there a version of the Biden administration policy that would be less, quote, reckless, less painted into a corner, and more empathetic?
It'd be really, really difficult. The empathy part, I think, is sadly lacking. This president clearly has an emotional attachment to Israel. He has a high regard for the people of Israel, the idea of Israel, the security of Israel, not so much, obviously, for the current Israeli prime minister. But I think that lack of empathy is important. As to whether the United States could be a credible broker, we're facing probably among the most consequential elections in American history. And the real question, I think, for the administration, since governing is about choosing, is whether in this kind of an election year, this administration is prepared to be risk-ready when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking, not risk-averse. The Israeli-Saudi piece is the easy part. It's whether or not the United States can be a credible mediator, if in fact, and I don't think we're talking about this happening anytime soon, if you ended up with an Israeli-Palestinian negotiation. Last time, Camp David, I was there, didn't succeed. We were facing gaps that were way, way, way too large. But we also didn't take charge of the summit. We need to be credible. We need to apply honey when it counts, assurances to both parties. But we also are going to have to apply plenty of vinegar, disincentives. Nobody's ever going to plant a tree in your honor if you make peace between Israelis and Palestinians. It's a tough lift.
Aaron David Miller, quickly, would Benjamin Netanyahu be willing to jettison his right-wing coalition if offered a deal that would end with normalization with Saudi Arabia?
I'm betting he's going to rely on what he knows, a right-wing Israeli government. If he goes for the deal, he's going to end up with new partners. And those partners don't have much regard for Mr. Netanyahu on trial for bribery, fraud, breach of trust in a Jerusalem district court. I suspect if he goes for this deal, far from this being his legacy, I think it's going to number his days.
Aaron David Miller, Khalid Al-Gindi, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Last Friday, U.S. forces struck the weapons depots and command centers of Iran-backed groups in Iraq and Syria in response to a drone attack in Jordan that killed 3 American service members. This past Wednesday, the U.S. escalated, using a targeted drone strike in Baghdad to kill a top leader of Kataib Hezbollah, one of the pro-Iranian paramilitary groups that the U.S. says is responsible for the Jordan attack. But another group in Iraq that claims no connection to the drone attack bore most of the dead and casualties of the U.S. strikes. Special correspondent Simona Foltine has this exclusive from Western Iraq.
Conflict is spreading through the Middle East. 400 miles from Gaza, another front has claimed 3 American and many more Iraqi lives.
We've been driving for hours into the deserts of western Iraq to reach a place called Akashat. It's located near Iraq's border with Syria and has been heavily hit by American airstrikes.
Those strikes were the Biden administration's response to a drone attack that killed 3 U.S. service members in Jordan. But who exactly did they hit? This stretch of barren land has been carved up between a number of armed actors jostling for power and control over the strategic border. Akashat, a small town left abandoned since the war with ISIS, falls under the 13th Brigade of the Popular Mobilization Forces, an umbrella group of paramilitary forces formed to fight ISIS beginning in 2014 and that are now officially part of Iraq's security forces. Abu Saif witnessed the attacks. He tells me that the first missile struck the military hospital.
Around 3 to 4 rockets hit the hospital. 5 people were inside. All of them were killed.
The wrecked hulk of an ambulance still lies beneath the rubble. 17 PMF members in total were killed.
They targeted other places in this compound so that anyone who's injured can't get medical care.
So you think it was on purpose?
Yes, it was on purpose. Why else would they start with the hospital?
This is the first time Brigade 13, also called Liwa Tufuf, was targeted by the United States, and many here are struggling to understand why. It's not part of the 4 entities that make up another, more secretive grouping called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which has claimed responsibility for attacking American troops at bases throughout Iraq and Syria.
We don't have anything to do with the attacks. They can't get to those who carry out the attacks, so they target those protecting the country's borders.
The group that is believed responsible for the bulk of attacks on American forces is Kataib Hezbollah. I visited their bases not far from Akashat back in 2021. Kataib Hezbollah is the most powerful of the self-dubbed resistance, but part of it has been incorporated into the larger PMF, and it tries to use this official government-bestowed status to shield itself from American retaliation. The United States has designated Kataib Hezbollah and other members of the resistance as terror organizations.
The Pentagon said that American fighter jets hit, quote, terrorist groups supported by Iran's Revolutionary Guards, unquote, and not the Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF, which is part of the Iraqi state. But the targeting of the PMF's Brigade 13 here in Akashat raises questions about those claims and the accuracy of the intelligence.
The other possibility, some Iraqi officials worry, is that the United States has broadened its definition of what it regards as a legitimate target to all of the PMF. Under heavy guard, the commander arrives to inspect the aftermath of the strikes. His men warily eye an American surveillance drone hovering above. Qasim Musleh heads Brigade 13 and the PMF in this area. He tells me that these installations have never been used to launch attacks on American forces.
This place and this entire sector falls under my responsibility. It has no aggressive activities towards American forces. We are part of the Popular Mobilization Forces, and we take our orders from the Prime Minister.
There are accusations against you that the 13th Brigade, or Liwa Tufuf, enabled groups like Kataib Hezbollah to launch attacks against the Americans.
First of all, I hope that the United States will reveal one piece of evidence that there is support to the resistance factions. There was no leadership here, as they claimed, or people with ties to foreign countries, or who took part in strikes on coalition forces.
So you can say with absolute confidence that your brigade has never attacked American forces?
Absolutely not, and we won't.
What is your message to the American government?
First of all, let them review their accounts and their agents who transmit information. The information they received is false. They should verify the information they received because there are innocent people here.
The White House gave plenty of advance warning of impending strikes, giving the factions responsible for attacking American troops time to vacate their facilities and leaving others to pay the price, including civilians. We drive onwards to Al-Qaim, where American strikes targeted a Kataib Hezbollah base inside a residential area. There I met Anmar al-Rawi. His younger brother, 20-year-old student Abdurrahman, was killed when a missile fell on the family home.
I was here when it happened. I carried my brother's body away with my own hands. We are civilians. This is our area. It belongs to us, Iraqis.
The security camera captured the impact. Another clip filmed on a cell phone, the sobs of desperate relatives. It's unclear whether this was a direct hit from an American warplane or secondary explosions from weapons depots that caught fire. Who do you think bears the responsibility for your brother's death?
In the first place, the Americans. Of course, their strike was a reaction to the attack on them, but their response fell on the civilians, not on the militaries. Not one from Kataib Hezbollah was killed. They knew there was ammunition in the base and that civilians would be affected.
Nearby, people gathered to pay their respects for the dead. Many Iraqis see the U.S. strikes not as self-defense, but as yet another violation of their country's sovereignty. Tribal leader Ragib al-Karbuli fears worse is yet to come.
Perhaps, if things continue to develop like this with action and reaction by the parties involved, it may lead to an unpredictable regional war.
I ask him what the solution is to prevent further escalation.
The solution to the solution is the Palestinian issue. An independent Palestinian state with full sovereignty will give an opportunity for security and peace in the entire region.
By striking inside Iraq, many here think the United States is fueling anger while not making enough effort to address the root causes of what has already become a regional war. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Simona Foltin in Western Iraq.
And for all of us, PBS News Weekly, thanks so much for watching.